I wanted to take a minute today to talk a bit more about this 15-second trailer that Nintendo released, just titled Emio, as it's absolutely taken the internet by storm. It's confused everyone. It's spawned a bunch of internet detectives now trying to figure out more information around this. And while I did talk about this a bit in Newswave, there's still some stuff I wanted to mention here. And we also had some updates and how this is a really big deal for Nintendo. And in fact, could be the first game we've seen from them in the history of the entire company. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So the 15-second trailer in question just shows a figure with a paper bag over their head. We have some glitching here and there where it looks like they change their appearance slightly. They lose the belt around the coat, and it looks like the facial expression also changes somewhat, where it has like more teeth kind of drawn in. But afterwards, we do have some Japanese text that loosely translates to smiling man, and that's it. We didn't have any other context or anything posted by Nintendo. They very much dropped the trailer and then just moved on completely. And it was a scattershot release, as in this trailer went everywhere. It was all over their social media accounts in different regions, whether it was on Twitter or X or on YouTube. And they did initially have their social media information posted in the YouTube description, but they removed it like 15 or 20 minutes later and just replaced it by hashtag #WhoIsEmio. Some people were curious as to why that happened. Well, on YouTube, on like the back end, you can set up default descriptions, and I feel like Nintendo just has that for all their video uploads. We'll just have their social media information. And I guess they didn't realize that, and they went in and quickly deleted it and replaced it there. So that's probably why you saw that. But the interesting thing about this is we probably wouldn't have been as surprised, and it wouldn't have had as much of an effect if it had leaked out early, and Nintendo now has plugged that YouTube source. So this is good timing for them, clearly, because it definitely just surprised everyone. It was out of left field. And now we're sort of scrambling, trying to learn more about this thing. So since its release, again, some updates have hit. For example, over on Kit and Krista's channel, Kit did talk a bit about this trailer. And of course, they would be very knowledgeable about how certain products will be presented to the public. And yes, trailer release or early trailer releases would be part of that. And he mentioned that at the end of the trailer, they have the Nintendo logo card flash, which typically would mean that this is something Nintendo themselves are doing, which is the most intriguing thing to me right now. I'll talk about that in a second, but there was like a false alarm because Bloober Team was brought up as potentially being the studio that maybe Nintendo is partnering with to make it. And the Bloober Team talked about a year ago that they were working on some kind of game for the Switch, and I think that paired with this trailer is why people started to immediately think that was the case. But it looks like not so much, as IGN in their recent Nintendo podcast say their own sources are confirming that it's not a Bloober Team project. So if that's the case, we're kind of back to square one. And while Nintendo could partner with other studios, since they typically will do that, and that's why this is so up in the air right now, they don't develop everything internally. Like they will actually, a lot of the time, take an intellectual property they own and then basically hire a studio to work on it and create a game. All right, it's pretty constant. There are many intellectual properties that have been long-running development projects of other studios that Nintendo does not own. So like Fire Emblem, for example, great example, right? Nintendo really doesn't develop a lot of Fire Emblem games. They have that set up with other studios and they deliver them and then they get released. It's a way that Nintendo is able to keep a pretty consistent cadence of releases to hold up their own platform and not have to necessarily worry so much about what third parties are doing. Now this, we'll say game for now, this Emio game, does have a webpage right now on Nintendo's website, again, playing into the idea that this could be Nintendo developing the thing. And when you look at the trailer, it is age restricted. It just comes up and says, hey, sign in or you can't watch this. And over on the Australian YouTube account where they uploaded it, it has all the things next to the mature rating as to why it's mature rated. This does not look like a light M rating is what we'll say. Some of the stuff next to this M rating, you're not going to see people on YouTube, or hear them, I should say, mention some of these words. They'll sidestep them in some way because it will immediately like trigger YouTube to slap down the video. And that's how serious this M rating is, which again is why it would be so interesting if this was Nintendo themselves developing this. One, they've never developed an M-rated game, which is something that people maybe aren't as aware of, because they'll look at M-rated games that Nintendo will publish and then immediately say, oh, no, they've made these games. Well, like, for example, here are all the different M-rated games that Nintendo has published. They have not developed an M-rated game. So you have like Eternal Darkness, Geist, Ninja Gaiden 3, Bayonetta 2, Devil's Third, Fatal Frame, and then Bayonetta 3. Many of these kind of speak for themselves, whether it's Bayonetta or Ninja Gaiden, Fatal Frame, Devil's Third, in terms of who developed them and not being Nintendo. The ones that seem to come up the most and maybe confuse some people are Eternal Darkness and Geist. So Eternal Darkness was made by Silicon Knights, and then Geist was made by N-Space. They're both defunct, by the way, now, but they were never owned by Nintendo. So Nintendo did not actually develop those. They published them, which means they can still own, say, the intellectual property itself, or the publishing rights for it. Then even for something like a Bayonetta 3, but they didn't actually develop the game. Nintendo themselves have, for the most part, stayed away from developing M-rated games completely. And the thing that's so interesting about this is, yes, it would be historical for them, but something like a psychological horror game that this seems like it's shaping up to be does make me wonder what ideas Nintendo could bring to the table and maybe shake things up a bit, because that is something I will always give Nintendo credit for. They will come up with very interesting and different and unique ideas, we'll say, for different games, even like small mechanics that you look at and you go, okay, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But then you play the game and they constantly figure out different ways to change things up. I think of even Mario Odyssey, where you take control of one of the enemies with your hat. You're like, that's kind of neat. But then you go through the game and it constantly changes, constantly evolves, and affects gameplay the entire time in pretty surprising ways. Now you kind of jump into the idea of psychological horror, and I'll say some of the creative freedom that it will give developers as to all the different things they can do, and it does make me wonder what exactly Nintendo could have up their sleeve. Now, I do want to bring up some crazy theories that are floating around, even a few things I had in mind. One, I do have to address the elephant in the room because it's already come up multiple times now. The idea that Nintendo could be partnering with Hideo Kojima. And this comes up because it does feel very Kojima-like. I get it. When you see something like this, where there's just no explanation, and Kojima does this with a lot of his games on the build-up for trailers, and they kind of string you along with little bits of information, and then eventually it turns out to be something completely different than you're expecting. Sure, I get that. And Kojima has now partnered with Sony. He's partnered with Microsoft. It's always possible that he could partner with Nintendo. I just don't see it for this sort of a project. I feel like Kojima would want to put his name on it, or at least put out there that, yeah, this is something I'm working on. It's kind of the way Kojima is. So I don't think this is a Kojima project. All right. But, I do wonder if Nintendo, because they will develop games with their hardware in mind, or sometimes with accessories in mind, and wouldn't this be a funny way for them to actually bring back and release the vitality sensor? This is long shot, way out there, crazy theory section, right? That would be kind of funny if Nintendo was like, hey, it's a horror game, psychological horror game, and we're going to measure your heart rate and emotion by attaching this accessory to your finger while you're playing, something like that. And I do remember the vitality sensor was mostly brought up and the idea was sold as something for like exercise. Wouldn't it be funny if they actually got it to market alongside of their first ever internally developed mature rated horror game? That'd be interesting. I guess it's something that could add a nice wrinkle to the equation for a game like this, but I also think people would immediately roll their eyes when they see it and they're like, you have to attach this thing, are you serious? But I don't know. I guess it could be kind of interesting the way Nintendo will, again, develop games around hardware. I wonder what they could come up with that. If they're able to tap into your heart rate and your emotions, what you're feeling at the time. Nintendo, they could get a little out of control with that one. Now, that's the other question really for this is, what kind of game is this? Some have brought up the idea that it's a visual novel. I'll just be honest, that would be incredibly disappointing for me if it's a visual novel. Not that it'd be bad, but I'm hoping this would be more like, so we brought up Eternal Darkness earlier on. Nintendo didn't develop that, but that had some very interesting fourth wall breaking ideas. I hope this game just tries to break the fourth wall consistently. And like Eternal Darkness acted like it deleted your game at one point. That's some interesting stuff that I feel like we've lost a bit now, and some of that has to do with just social media in general and how we're always connected and you can find the answer immediately. And if a game tries to pull a fast one on you, you can very quickly grab your phone and Google it and be like, okay, no, it didn't actually delete my game. You know, I don't mind when a game tries to do something weird like that, and this seems like something to be up Nintendo's alley to try that. Oh, and as for, I guess, marketing this game going forward, we assume there will be another trailer drop at some point. And I think this was the correct way for Nintendo to go about it. Just drop a trailer, don't say anything about it, move on. And I think if this is something that's not coming out this year, we'll say, and Nintendo's going to release this next year, that means there would be a direct of some kind as they go along. And I feel like just different events where this thing interrupts it in some way, 10, 15 seconds, where it fades in, does the staticky thing, comes around, and then it goes back out, and it doesn't say anything. There's no acknowledgement. I think that'd be a really interesting way to keep like the intrigue going for this. And even if Nintendo releases a trailer for their new Zelda game or something, and somehow Emio ends up at the end of it, or just, I think there are ways that Nintendo can fourth wall break this a bit more, and that can be a way for them to kind of set up this viral marketing campaign and keep it going without spending stupid amounts of money on it. And I'm not expecting this game to have a massive budget behind it. I'm not expecting the scope to be crazy, nothing like that. So I feel like the marketing would probably be in that similar lane. And because of that, I think relying on social media and being unique is probably their best bet. So I hope they have some fun and interesting ideas for the marketing as well as the game. But above all else, I hope this is Nintendo internally developing the game. I think it would be a very, very interesting thing to see what Nintendo could do with a mature rated game and a psychological horror style game. It seems like they could come up with some really cool ideas, and it would definitely be out of their wheelhouse and something we've never seen them do before, which is just develop a mature rated game. So wow, interesting stuff, something to keep an eye on here, and it definitely seems to show a bit of a shift maybe internally at Nintendo, whether it's a younger generation sort of coming up through the ranks, or maybe just different thought process as they, I'm sure, are witnessing their own audience kind of mature and maybe get a bit older. But let me know what you guys think about all of this down below with this Emio trailer. What do you think is going on here, and what do you think their strategy is for maybe the next trailer drop or bit of information they'll put out there? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.